also a place where his grace was extended liberally. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the good news. And the gospel is good news because the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. The law was rigid and demanding. It was bad news. Keep all the law and be saved. Disobey in one point and be lost. And that's bad news because none of us can keep all the law and we're lost. But Jesus came full of grace. He extended mercy. He was anxious to forgive. People were so attracted to him because he was full of grace that they walked for miles to hear him teach. They climbed trees to get a glimpse of him. They dug through roofs to get access to him. They pushed through crowds to touch the hem of his garment. They ran around a lake to be fed by him. And Jesus was so full of grace that he went to the cross and gave his life. For it is by grace that you are saved through faith. This is not of yourselves. It is not of works, lest anybody should boast. And since we are the recipients of such grace, we ought to extend it generously to others. The early church was full of grace. We read, with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and much grace was upon them all. And the church today has this mission of extending grace. We're to be people whose conversation is seasoned with salt, full of grace. Jesus said, by this shall they know that you're my disciples, that you have loved one for another. The church should be a place where the lost feel welcomed, where we trust positive intention, where the hurting are healed, where we reach out in the community and we extend grace to those who are in need. And you know what? When you get a group of people together who really believe something strongly, and yet they speak the truth in love, it's so contagious you can't keep people away. I want to show you a video testimony of Liz Curtis Higgs. Some of you may recognize that name. She's now a best-selling Christian author, Bad Girls of the Bible, a very popular women's speaker. But when Liz Higgs first came to Louisville, Kentucky and visited our church, she just moved from Detroit, Michigan, where she was a radio personality. She was the rock and roll mama of Detroit. And she was into feminism and alcohol and drugs and immorality to the point she worked temporarily with Howard Stern, and Howard Stern told her that she needed to clean up her act. It was too raunchy. She moved to Louisville, started to work at a radio station in our city, and a couple from our church extended grace and love to her and eventually invited her to church. And when she came, I was preaching through the book of Ephesians, and I came to Ephesians 5 and 6. It talks about the family, so I slowed way down, and I had a series of messages on the family. And she recently, speaking at a convention, told the story of how she came to Christ. I want you to watch this video and hear her testimony.
I was a mess. I didn't know I was pretty, valuable, worthy, or loved. I knew nothing, except that I was miserable. Some of us have to go all the way down to the bottom of the pit before we can look up, and I was down in that pit. Lord said, I better send somebody to tell her to look up. And over my pit of despair, two dear people came to work with me at Wacky Radio in Louisville. And they looked down and said, here's a project. Will you look at this woman's lifestyle? Will you listen to her mouth? She is ready to hear some good news. Now, they didn't take me to church. You wouldn't have either. No, you really wouldn't have, no. Here's our friend Liz. Please ignore her glazed expression. You know, it was a hard night. They just loved me. They invited me into their hearts. They invited me into their home. I finally invited myself to their church. I wanted to see if there was anybody else as weird as these two. And there were whole pews full of them. These friendly, loving, non-judgmental people. I sat there in the pew thinking, if they only knew what kind of woman I am, they wouldn't even want to sit near me. The minister got up. Our passage today is Ephesians 5, Wives, submit to your husbands. Good teaching, or wouldn't be in there. But here I sat, women's liberty, single woman, wives, submit to your husbands, was not the message my friends were praying for that day. You bring a friend to church, you want something loving, grace-filled, evangelistic. You weren't praying for wives, submit to their husbands as the lead text. But if you know that teaching, you know a couple of verses later it says an incredible thing. And husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, being willing to die for her. I turned to my friend and I said, if I ever met a guy willing to die for me, I would marry him in a heartbeat. She said, Lizzie, a man has already died for you. We went